How many of you have spent an all-nighter studying for a big test or working on a project? How about staying up super late to do so? How about in anticipation of a big test, you go to bed much earlier than you typically do to get a lot more sleep? Well, we know sleep affects a lot of our daily processes, but it can have a huge effect on our cognition or how we think the next day. This study today looks at how, in terms of cognition, how much sleep is best, or how too much sleep can be detrimental. Let's jump right in. What's up everyone, my name's Henrik and welcome back to another clinical trial review. Today I'm reviewing a paper that looks at the effects of self-reported sleep duration on cognition. This was done by Dr. Conor Wild and others at Western University in Ontario, Canada, and published in December of 2018. As the paper comically starts out, we all sleep, hopefully. But how much is best? In a 2012 US health survey with 250,000 people, about 29% of respondents reported sleeping less than 6 hours a day, which is pretty bad, right? A study in 2017 estimated the cost of insufficient sleep, like how much money is lost in the United States, was based on $299 and $433 billion annually, which is based on losses in productivity and cognitive performance in the workplace. Regular sleep helps maintain numerous aspects of physical and mental health, physiological health, and cognition, and there are many speculative studies on these things. Like your parents saying that 8 hours of sleep is important probably came from something logical. Studies really haven't broken down how sleep length correlates with different aspects of cognition, like memory versus reasoning, or if too much sleep can be a bad thing, at least in human trials. But hint hint, this study does, so let's take a look and break it down. Looking at the study design, this study was a purely observational and clinical trial that looked at correlations between sleep length and cognition in over 10,000 subjects around the world. They measured demographic variables like age, sex, level of education, and frequency of anxiety and depressive-related disorders in the past month. The average age was 41, with a standard deviation of 14. As part of this big survey, subjects self-reported number of hours slept on average in the past month, number of hours slept the night before the survey, and they completed 12 different cognitive tests. They used an online survey system for cognition, which is on the website cambridgebrainsciences.com, and you can check that out if you're interested. The 12 different cognitive tests are listed here with what they're looking to measure in parentheses. I'm not going to explain them, but you can pretty easily Google the name and find more information about it. The researchers filtered out any outliers in the data that was 4 or more standard deviations away from the average, so the data was relatively reliable. The 12 different cognitive tests were grouped together into 4 groups to simplify the data. The groups were short-term memory, reasoning, verbal ability, and overall cognition. They took all this data and ran a bunch of regressions and statistical tests, which gets pretty complex, and that's explained much more in the paper. In short, they approximated trends and fit the data curves for average length of sleep, last night's sleep, with various components of cognition along with those demographic measurements looked at. They normalized the data to a normal distribution, so they graphed everything with standard deviations. It's important to note that every piece of data in this study was self-reported, and although very strong outliers were removed, the data is not as reliable as measuring length of sleep with an EEG in a lab. People could realistically be making up these results. However, the sample size was over 10,000 people, and that's still pretty large and could be representative of trends in a population. Taking a look at the results of this study, of the 10,136 participants, the average sleep reported in the past month was 6.42 hours, and the night before the test average was 6.88 hours. Increasing age was associated with less sleep per night. Based on the cognitive tests, the optimal amount of sleep was defined as 7.38 hours a night, with a 95% confidence interval, or like a pretty confident range, between 7.02 and 7.91 hours, as you can see from the shaded portion in this chart. In these graphs, you can see how quickly cognitive performance drops off if you don't get the optimal amount of sleep, which is that dotted line value. They also found that sleep affects different areas of cognition differently. So short-term memory is maximized with a little longer sleep, which is a little over 8 hours, while verbal and reasoning components of cognition are maximized around 7 to 7.5 hours of sleep. And these differences were statistically significant. They also looked at how much sleep subjects got the night before the study, and researchers compared that to the average sleep over the past month. Subtracted that difference, and this term was called sleep delta. They looked at how much sleep delta maximized cognition and found that your overall cognition was maximized at a sleep delta of 1.18 hours. That means that if you sleep longer by approximately an hour compared to normal, you will maximize your cognitive performance. Not causally, but this is how it was correlated. Significantly, sleeping 2.76 hours more than usual was associated with decreasing cognition. It's important to note that this study, as I've said throughout, does not indicate causation. Like, we can't say that sleep or lack of sleep causes changes in cognition. This study just looks to associate the two trends and see some correlations in trends, not to give us something causal. Asking the important question, why does this matter? What can you learn from this? Well, based on cognition, sleep is maximized between 7 and 8 hours a night. If you get less sleep than this, you could be significantly messing with your cognition. This means you might not be able to remember things as easily, communicate as effectively, or reason through different problems as good as you could. This is especially important if you have schoolwork or actual work for your job. The study showed that a single night of sleep could have significant effects on your sleep, more so than the average over the past month, and this was identified based on the sleep delta value. I know sometimes you crazy people out there like to spend all-nighters for big tests or other reasons, and maybe I've done that too. But maybe the minimal amounts of information you're learning that late night are insignificant to the amount of cognitive performance you're losing on that test or on that project. Additionally, if you have a big test or project the next day, it might be best not to sleep a lot more than you typically do. Or optimal was around 7 to 8 hours, because that could negatively affect you. Although I could definitely speak forever on how important sleep is based on my personal experiences throughout college and things like that, I'm not here to recommend one thing or another. I'm just here explaining published research that could affect you in some way. But thank you for listening. My description below has the full paper linked with some references to other papers and stats that I've talked about. But don't forget to comment and subscribe down below. If you have an interesting clinical trial or interesting topic you've come across, feel free to throw it in the comments and I might review it. But I hope you guys learned something today and have a good one. Thanks.